Welcome back to the Philos Project channel. This is The Overlook, and I'm your host, Dominique Hoffman. And in today's episode, we are going to be looking at the news coming out of the Middle East. There was a terror attack in Jerusalem, killing at least 6 people, injuring 20. And Israel's response was a direct airstrike in Doha, targeting a Hamas compound. And the international community has a lot to say about these developments. And then we're going to look actually to Russia and some stuff that's happening there as well, just to kind of round out a global perspective on the news that is happening. So let's take a look at this news in the context of just broader negotiations to end this war. I will say one of my biggest disappointments of the Trump administration, they've done some amazing policy work here domestically. But my biggest critique is of how they've handled the war between Israel and Gaza. The U.S. has immense leverage against Hamas. And we've seen this administration, with many officials' ties to Qatar, kind of favor pacifism in this conflict. I expected a second Trump term to take a very strong stance with Israel and really kind of bring the legacy of the Abraham Accords into the current conflict, which we have not really seen them leverage or do. And I believe Steve Witkoff and many others have really leveraged both the Middle East tour that was taken earlier this year and just their position within the cabinet to advance potentially their own personal interest and not the interest of ending the war or bringing the hostages home. I say this because we can look back at some past tweets of the Trump administration. So this was part of a Truth kind of social tweet, but it was reposted by POTUS and the White House's official Instagram account. And this was back on March 5th. So a little bit over a month and some change into the second term, President Trump released this. This was before the official Middle East tour to Qatar of the administration. Shalom, Hamas means hello and goodbye. You choose. Release all of the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the dead bodies of the people you murdered, or it is over, capital over, for you. Only sick and twisted people keep bodies, and you are sick and twisted. I am sending Israel everything it needs to finish the job. Not a single Hamas member will be safe if you don't do as I say. I have just met with your former hostages whose lives you have destroyed. This is your last warning. For the leadership, now is the time to leave Gaza while you still have a chance. Also to the people of Gaza, a beautiful future awaits, but not if you hold hostages. If you do, you are dead. Make a smart decision. Release the hostages now, or there will be hell to pay. Okay, so this is what President Trump kind of came out. He made a tweet about the hostages even before taking office on January 20th, and essentially said, if the hostages aren't all returned by the time I get to office, like Hamas, you're in trouble. And then he was there for a month and some change. And then this tweet goes out, very strong wording, but no follow-up. And unfortunately, how strong and hard power works and deterrence works is that there has to be kind of a credible belief that the global superpower who's making a very strong statement that it is over is going to follow through. And here we are in September, nearing the 2-year anniversary of October 7th, and the United States hasn't really decisively acted. And again, this is my personal opinion. I have no inside information. This is just what I have gathered from an outsider looking in and following and tracking the news. I think that there is vested interest for the Trump family and other members of the Trump administration to play nice with Qatar. And of course, Qatar funds Hamas. They house Hamas. They have a vision of a Sharia society that's ideologically akin to Hamas. And they're essentially these brokers that have always been the go-between for terrorists in the region and negotiations, specifically when it comes to Hamas. And the rest of the world kind of pretends that they don't know that Qatar is the funder and essentially houses both members of the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas within their sovereign borders. Okay, so that's my rebuke of this administration's kind of handling of the war and this conflict. I've been beyond underwhelmed by Steve Witkoff's inability to negotiate. That is his job. He seems more interested, again, outside perspective. This is a strong statement, might get me into some trouble, but it seems from my perspective that he was more interested in the Gulf states on his Middle East visit. I believe they even asked a few of the hostages who were released at that time to meet with President Trump in Qatar. And that's like asking a victim to go meet, their savior in the house of the person who berated them or raped them or, attempted to murder them. It was such a weird dynamic. And the hostage actually declined to visit to Qatar and actually came to the White House in the United States. But even like the setup to me just spoke of a tone deafness towards the situation and a complete inability to be honest about Qatar's role in this entire conflict. Okay, so that was President Trump's statement back in March. He recently made another truth tweet. I don't even know what to say. He made another truth. And this truth, again, reiterates this message. Less capital words, but on the 7th of September, he said, everyone wants the hostages home. Everyone wants this war to end. The Israelis have accepted my terms. It is time for Hamas to accept as well. I have warned Hamas about the consequences of not accepting. This is my last warning. There will be another one. There will not be another one. Okay, this is the third one, if I'm counting. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Okay, so again, love the messaging. Don't love the follow through of this administration, personally. That's my critique. I'm a Trump supporter. Again, before I can already see the comments, people are gonna be like, oh my gosh, like you're not a true conservative, blah, blah, blah. I voted for the man 3 times. I'm a supporter of Trump. Doesn't mean I have to agree with his policy on everything. Don't think he's handled this conflict to the strength that he could have, especially again on the legacy of the Abraham Accords. Okay, so that truth goes out. And then one day later, there was a terror attack in Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem is typically not, in recent years, even decades, kind of been the epicenter of a lot of violence. A lot of the violence has occurred more in the south or targeted Tel Aviv. But this terror attack happened in Jerusalem at a Jerusalem bus stop. There was 2 Palestinian gunmen and 6 people were killed, and I believe 20 others were injured. And it was amongst one of the deadliest attacks in Jerusalem in recent years. So this is a terror attack. Again, there's pressure on Hamas. They're not going to win this war. So in order to spoil that or inflict attrition on Israel, these like lone terror attacks tend to happen. The Houthis also attacked Israel in the wake of all of this, which they've been doing since the start of October 7th. And again, despite the U.S. making a ceasefire deal with the Houthis, they cut Israel out of that deal, which is around the time that the administration went to the Middle East and favored the Gulf states and not Israel. So that kind of shapes my assessment of this administration's policy in the region. So this attack happened. And Israel said, okay, well then none of your Hamas leadership is safe and we are going to respond. And they did respond. They responded, but in a way that kind of broke the status quo of fighting in this region. Although since October 7th, we've seen Iran directly engage with Israel then directly engage with Iran. So a lot of status quo existing policies have been shattered. And we saw Israel strike Doha, and Doha, of course, is in Qatar. The leadership of Hamas has lived in Qatar. That's like the open, again, secret that no one wants to talk about. So the direct response to the Jerusalem terror attack was a strike on a basically compound. Arab families tend to live in these like big compounds. It's not something we really have here in the West. And that compound housed a lot of Hamas's top leadership, including, I believe, its chief of staff, which promised another October 7th. There was an official statement coming out of the defense ministry in Israel. After the murderous attack in Jerusalem and Gaza, Netanyahu instructed all security agencies to prepare for the possibility of thwarting the leaders of Hamas. So Israel responded strongly, and they hit this compound in Doha. Reports right now say 5 official Hamas leaders were killed. Hamas is claiming that they did not kill all of the leaders that Israel claims to have targeted and killed. I believe there was 10 direct drone strikes. And of course, the international community is in an uproar. People on the right are saying Israel's attacking our sovereign ally, Qatar. Let's be very, very clear. Qatar is not ideologically our ally. Israel has been a formidable ally in the region and a very robust ally in the region. Qatar is this very like ceremonial ally. There is I believe it's our largest airbase in Qatar. None of those American, neither the airbase or any other targets were hit except for this Hamas compound. But the international community is outraged. It's so crazy to me that we live in a world where people are more outraged, including these like crazy woke right people, about terrorists being targeted, and only terrorists. This was a highly, let me use words that a lot of dumb idiots on the right seem to fail to understand when they talk about genocide and Israel as like this evil demonic state. This drone attack was highly discriminate. No civilians were killed. Only Hamas leadership was killed. You know what was not highly discriminate? The terror attack in Jerusalem that killed civilians, or October 7th. That is just terror and attrition for the sake of terror and attrition. And the people targeted are Israelis, predominantly, mostly of them being Jews, although Arabs and Druze were also killed and kidnapped on October 7th, and Christians. But being targeted for the sake of who they are, that is intent for genocide. That's genocidal intent. A highly discriminate attack against terror leaders is not an attack on civilians, because of course people are like, oh, this is a civilian compound. No, it's not. It's a compound for Hamas. And if you're more outraged about that than the terror attack that happened in Jerusalem, and you claim that this is Israel spoiling some sort of a deal, and not that it was Hamas spoiling that deal with that terror attack in Jerusalem, is so outrageous to me. And then you can't fix stupid at that point. Like, I'm so convinced that we can't really fix some of the stupidity that's widely believed and deeply believed on the right and on the left as well. So President Trump has something to say. Of course, he's going to have to officially respond because Qatar does house our largest airbase, and President Trump condemned it. Although there are reports, I believe in the New York Times I saw, I can link the article if I find it. They were talking about how both the United States and Qatar were alerted to this attack. I suspect, and this is just my own, again, analysis, that Qatar realizes that Hamas really has no hope or future in that region. And I think they're much more interested in this potential alliance with the United States and the financial cooperation that they're getting with the United States than they are in maintaining a dying terror organization, a terror cell. That's my personal opinion. What this attack does do as well, I want to mention, is it takes Qatar kind of out of the negotiation seat. And so we'll likely see Egypt kind of step into that role. They have stepped into that role. You have people outraged that, oh, like this is Israel spoiling negotiations. It's not. It's Israel targeting a country that houses top Hamas leadership. So it goes back to this octopus doctrine, which is, killing the octopus by cutting the head off, not fighting endlessly and, using a ton of resources, putting other civilians in harm's way by trying to cut off the tentacles, like just go straight to the head. This is an awesome New York Post article that came out in November of 2023, right after October 7th. And it talks about how Qatar houses the top 3 leaders of Hamas with a staggering total net worth of $11 billion, absolute luxury. And this photo here has one of the sons of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh, who's been killed, lounges in a luxury hotel in Qatar. Haniyeh is worth more than $4 billion. This is what the leadership of of Hamas does, living in Qatar, while the Palestinians that they claim to represent in this generational freedom fight suffer. Hamas does not care about their own civilians. This is perfectly juxtaposes. Look at these children, and then look at the son of Ismail Haniyeh. Okay. So over here is the Gaza Strip, where all the Palestinians live and suffer. And this is Qatar in the Gulf, where the leadership lives in billion-dollar wealth. If that doesn't outrage the Tucker Carlsons and the Candace Owens and the Dave Smiths and the woke right, and also the left. But again, I focus on the right because I just think the left is so far gone in drinking this Kool-Aid. But where's Tucker Carlson saying, well, that's just not. How can you pledge your allegiance to Gaza while you're living in Qatar? That doesn't seem right. You shouldn't have dual loyalties, right? That's my horrible impersonation of Tucker Carlson. But there's like this manufactured outrage when it's Israel, but not when it's Hamas. So for everyone who's like, Israel struck a sovereign nation. Okay, but that sovereign nation houses and is a safe haven and a hub for top Hamas leaders. Okay, so this was the White House's response to that. Let's take a look at that. Ryan Levitt made a press room announcement, which was unfortunately held. It is unfortunate. Why does the United States continue to interact with Qatar and officials in Doha and keep our largest naval or our air base in Qatar without demanding that it cut ties to facilitating Hamas? So it is unfortunate that it is in Qatar. And the question is, why have you let that go unchecked? And that's not you as in President Trump. I mean, that's been the standing status quo with past administrations as well. It's so crazy to say that Qatar has taken risks to help advance and broker peace when they funded the initial chaos that started this war. That's what's just so crazy. And there was this map, I wish I had it, from when Biden was in office and this war started, that showed how our money was going to Iran and also to Qatar, but then also to Israel to then fight this war. It's like, okay, for all of the America First people on the right here in America, why aren't you outraged that our money is going to fund a cyclical war? Why are you not outraged that our money is going to fund jihadists, like official state sponsors of terror? The difference between Iran and Qatar is that Qatar looks beautiful. I mean, you even hear like Tucker Carlson just like rave about Doha and how safe Doha is. In a recent episode, I talked about how Doha was essentially built off of slave labor and human trafficking, and that it's not this utopia that the West tries to make it to be. And I believe the Biden administration elevated Qatar to like special status to NATO allied nations. We have manufactured Qatar as a critical ally in the region, and we have given it leverage over us and our interests and our allies' interests, aka Israel, that has been to our detriment. And we continue to do this like crazy dance. So essentially, Qatar knew it was coming. This was something that everyone was aware of, and they're going to posture, both Qatar and the United States, that they condemn it. They didn't know about it. It would not have happened. I believe Israel, although they need to act unilaterally, because this administration has kind of hung them out to fight on their own in the very same way that the Biden administration has or did. I think Trump would have essentially told Israel to back down if all parties were not aware and didn't give this like silent nod and okay. And I want to make it clear, a lot of my harsh critique is of members in the Biden administration, I had a lot of critiques for the Biden administration. Our critiques for members of the Trump administration. Like Pam Bondi, for example, is FARA registered with ties to Qatar. Who approved the Qatari plane becoming Air Force One? Pam Bondi, with ties officially to Qatar. There are very obvious links. Even Steve Witkoff and a lot of deals, I talked about this with the Trump empire. I believe they made a multi-billion-dollar deal for development in Doha. So you can take a step back and say, okay, there are special interests and there are vested interests for members of the Trump administration. And I do believe that President Trump wants the hostages returned home. You lose your leverage when you're making deals with the devil and then you're demanding the devil to release the hostages and you're demanding the devil to help you end this war. Because for Qatar, they want U.S. money and they want what U.S. money brings, because Qatar is one of the wealthiest nations in the region, if not in the world, with their oil exports. And so it's not that they need the money. The Gulf states don't need our money. What they need is the influence that their money tied to U.S. money brings in the West, because Qatar has very ideological and regional aims to become a hegemonic power, to yield wild and very widespread influence. So where members of the Trump administration might be wanting personal interest tied to Qatar, Qatar takes that and leverages it for influence and power within the United States and within our politics. And that's what we're seeing play out. That's why this has been a very, very long and drawn out threat by President Trump, starting from before he entered office, and we're already in September. We've seen how quickly President Trump's administration has been able to act on ICE deportations, on correcting the lack of law and order on our schools and anti-Semitism on our university campuses. We've seen him turn around many, many historic trade deals, just like with Japan last week, and the whole tariff debacle that turned out to not be as bad as everyone said it was going to be, and bringing manufacturing back to the United States. I believe even Apple invested billions of dollars to bring manufacturing back to America out of China. Those are huge wins, and they were done within the first few months of President Trump's time in office. But this war has been something that apparently the administration hasn't been able to broker an end to. And again, just basic AI 101. If you're going to make threats like President Trump did on Truth Social back in March, and then you're echoing those threats again in September when you're doing deals with Qatar, you lose your strategic leverage. You're not a credible threat to Hamas. And I think Hamas is at this point, they're a death cult. I think that they see the writing on the wall and they're just going to double down and not engage in any sort of a ceasefire agreement, because they have also violated and spoiled every ceasefire agreement since October 7th. Okay, that's my long-winded rant. I want to play this clip from the Free Press. It's great. I love the Free Press. Haviv Gur, who works at the Free Press, talks with Raphael Stewart about some of the ideological motivations of Qatar. And I want to highlight that here because I think that's important. I don't want to lose sight of that. You'll hear Tucker Carlson and a bunch of people on the right. I'm going to play an Instagram from this guy that I follow who absolutely irks and irritates me and is so unintelligent and is such an apologist for the axis of chaos, meaning Russia, China, and Iran, and is such an anti-Jew. I'm going to play a clip from him to kind of bring this all home ideologically, what that means for us too politically here in the United States. Before we do that, I want to frame kind of where Qatar is at ideologically and what their motives are, because if you listen to Tucker Carlson, you would just think like Qatar is the new beacon of civilization. And I agree that the US has more leverage. As I said, I think there's some personal vested interest in dealings with Qatar, but we could have also tied economic trade deals with a resolution to this conflict. We could have leveraged that more. Because again, what Qatar wants more than anything is influence in the West and in America. They've poured hundreds of billions of dollars into our country. Again, for everyone who screams about AIPAC, which is extremely small compared to the Qatar lobby, you should be outraged about this foreign collusion, this foreign interference, this foreign manipulation. So anyways, I agree with him, but I wanted to say that I think for the sake of personal gain, many in the Trump administration might not use that leverage to its fullest because they don't want to forsake any personal gain. But I think that both of those things likely could have been done at the same time. And I would say radical conservative is starting to make sense in the conservative right in America as well. Not as extreme, not as unified, not as organized, not as ideologically motivated by eschatological dogma, but we're even seeing like the religious language on the right by Tucker asking, oh, who are the chosen people? Oh, it's not the Christians. And oh, but the Jews, they believe in absolute submission to Allah, to God, and so does the Christian, and maybe the Christians and the Muslims are aligned. So we're seeing that religious language also now used on the right, but conservative extremism is a thing. It sounds like an oxymoron, but it's definitely not. I think that was just a really great summary. And this goes back to what I was talking about with the Abraham Accords, is that it appears the Trump administration has sidestepped the leverage and the power of the Abraham Accords in favor of whatever Qatar is trying to offer them. And I believe that is one of the reasons why this war has been prolonged, because the Abraham Accord countries actually have an interest to see this war end. And Egypt, for example, which is normalized with Israel, doesn't want Hamas as a destabilizing force, even internally, because there's been negotiations about Egypt absorbing, Palestinian refugees. So Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, they realize the threats of the revolutionary conservatism that's aligned with Qatar, and that's why they allied and normalized, well, not Saudi Arabia officially, but with Israel. And we've seen an abandonment of the Abraham Accords and a shift towards Qatar. And I think that the summary was great to understand that Qatar is linked to a brotherhood ideology and eschatology and political worldview, which includes Sharia and is religiously motivated and extreme. And again, Al Jazeera, which is this huge arm and wing of propaganda for Hamas, for Hezbollah, for the Houthis, is banned in Saudi Arabia and in Jordan and in Egypt because those countries recognize the ideological threats and the agenda of Qatar. So why doesn't America? Why doesn't the West? Why doesn't Tucker Carlson? Why doesn't Candace Owens ask those questions? Because if they're going to just ask questions, I'm going to just ask questions about why their loyalties have shifted to an Islamist regime. Okay, so let's just, for kicks and giggles, watch this far right content creator on Instagram. He has a rather small platform, but he loves to just yell lies about Israel. He reminds me of like a even more obnoxious Nick Fuentes, if that's even possible. I literally follow him to get inspiration for content. And also because when people are like, oh, Tucker Carlson's just like on the fringes, he doesn't represent the majority view. No, Tucker is influencing people like this guy, Ethan, to create content and disinformation. And we're going to go through the comment section. just to kind of see the ideological indoctrination that is now so present on the right as it was on the left for the last few decades. This guy loves to yell. The capital of America's ally, Qatar. Okay, yes, we have an air base there, but Israel is also a formal ally of the United States. It's a Hamas outpost where Hamas officials live.
Meaning the Qatar...
Because they knew that it was coming. No, they won't respond because they want to see Hamas leadership gone. I also don't believe that his claim that Israel has bombed 6 sovereign nations this week is at all accurate. The comment section is always just so degenerate and hilarious. Why is Western media not talking about this? The response sent $10 billion to Israel. It's all part of this like narrative that the Jews are trying to dominate the world and they're attacking America's allies, therefore they're not an ally of America. It just demonstrates a complete lack of awareness for geopolitics, for the very complex intersectionality between geopolitics, history in the region, colonialism, foreign policy from a historic perspective, and how that all comes together to complicate this region incredibly. The hilarious thing is this influencer talked about how, in another clip, how Russia condemned the attack, which is hilarious. And that brings me to the last news bit from this week, which is that Russia condemns Israel's strike. This is so crazy. You can't make this stuff up. Russia condemns Israel's strike on Qatar as a gross violation of UN Charter, which is hilarious, considering that Russia is still fighting a war that it very, very, very easily should have won if we're just looking at capabilities. The war between Russia and Ukraine has highlighted that Russia's a paper tiger with Cold War capabilities. And last I checked, Russia invaded Ukraine, which is crazy, like started a war unprovoked. So there's that. And then on top of that, what's even more ironic, considering the news from this week, is that there was a Russian drone that was struck down in Poland. And if you're not aware as to why this is bad for geopolitics, in a way far worse than this is really striking Qatar, is because Poland is a NATO country. And according to Article 5 of NATO, if one NATO country is invaded, it's essentially a security pact against Russia and the USSR, it's a legacy of the Cold War, that if a NATO country is invaded, then all NATO countries will come together to then basically defend and attack Russia. And so Article 4 of NATO, which allows for there to be like an official petition, has been issued. Russia denied it planned to attack Polish targets. President Trump tweeted about this on Truth Social and said, here we go. This was apparently part of a NATO training incident. And it's kind of assumed that this Russian drone accidentally wandered into Poland. It could be Russia testing the strength of NATO. But again, like the hypocrisy on the global stage that Russia is going to condemn Israel as it's been an agitator for chaos in the region, provoking a war against Ukraine, and now this whole drone incident, which violates NATO, is laughable. But the reason I also bring it up is because there's been a lot of talk recently. We see Tucker talking about it, and we've seen people doing analysis on it, of the threat of the China-Russia alliance or the China-Russia-Iran axis of chaos. I don't believe we're on the brink of World War III. I think China, Russia, and Iran are paper tigers. I think the trade wars that have currently just happened, as well as COVID, has highlighted the weaknesses of China. The inability for Russia to win this war decisively with Ukraine has highlighted their many weaknesses and gaps in capabilities, and Iran is essentially laughable at this point. There's essentially I hate saying regime change, because Tucker Carlson was talking about how, the U.S. just wants regime change in Iran, but the Iranian regime is on the brink of regime change and potentially revolution within Iran. It has been a weakening regime for decades. It's a slow dying regime. It's kind of like the Castro regime in Cuba. And I don't think that they're in any place to engage in a global war. But I wonder if we're going to start to hear Tucker Carlson talking about the threat of World War III again. But if there was an escalation to World War III, it would not be because of Israel or the Jews. It would be because of rogue drones like this going off in Poland and activating NATO Article 5. But of course, I'm sure lies will come as this news develops. That is a summary of this week. This week is also 9/11. And so I just want to remember all the family members who were affected or lost loved ones on 9/11 and to refocus that that was a tragedy on American soil on the part of Islamic Jihad and Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, who are enemies of the United States. There's been a concerted effort by Tucker Carlson to also diminish the involvement of Al-Qaeda or try and humanize Osama bin Laden and blame 9/11 on the Jews. And by politicizing that and making it a conspiracy, I think we lose sight of the victims and the tragedy that 9/11 was for America. So with all of this news, it feels chaotic. It's developing across Qatar, Gaza, and now in Poland with Russia. I'm sure there will be updates to come, but that is a bit of a lay of the land. There's some more exciting news coming out of the region. It kind of been quiet for a little bit. And since October 7th, quiet has been nice. But we will definitely follow up on this. Like always, please like, comment, and subscribe to the Fearless Project channel, and I will see you in the next episode.